Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in. So today is a special episode because this is a podcast about the stories that shape us, and I'm bringing on a storyteller with a great story behind her life as well. Storytelling is a huge part of what we do as human beings, and there's so much power behind it. And this is why I wanted to explore this today with Camille and her own story. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's lovely to be here. So excited to get into this with you today.
Yeah, and before we get into your backstory, I'd like to just let everybody know a little bit about what it is that you do presently, and then we'll kind of explore the backdrop to what led you to being here.
Yeah, sure. So, as you alluded to, I am a professional storyteller, a storytelling specialist, if you will, and I help people communicate better. And when I say story, I really mean any kinds of communication, because that's really what communication is. When we are talking to each other, when we're writing, when we're interacting with each other in any type of way, really, we're telling stories. So, for me, in my work, in my business that I call Storytelling with Heart, I work with leaders and founders and executives and high performing individuals of all kinds. And I help them communicate more effectively and authentically. I help them get the stuff that lives within inside us, the ideas and perspectives and unique points of view and experiences and stories and knowledge, all of that stuff, and figure out how to express it better and more effectively with the people that they want to reach and in the places where they want to make an impact.
And what is it about storytelling that is so compelling for us as human beings? You know, I think about we live in the age of Google and we live in the age of information, but I think storytelling has never been more important than in today's day and age.
Well, I mean, as you and I have discussed this, before, prior to being on the podcast, and you had used the language, I think that we are wired for story. And actually, and this is not my expertise, but there are books written about this. Lisa Crone has a number of books about this that actually explore the neuroscience that our brains are really indeed wired for stories. We are designed to tell and interpret information as stories. So even if something is just a bunch of kind of straight up facts or something that seems benign, our brains are trying to make a story out of it. So, I mean, I'm doing that right now. I have kind of my own story about, what this podcast means, about who you are, about what my relationship to you is, about who your listeners might be, and how I might connect with them, and the stories that I want to tell and convey, and all of this kind of stuff going on behind the scenes that we might not even articulate, represent forms of story.
Yeah. I think this is fascinating to think about that, like everything that happens to us, it's not like your perception of it and my perception of the experience are not identical, because through the lens of our own lived experience, what we're doing is we are making meaning out of what happens to us. And so we can take a relatively simple experience and, based on whatever our background might be, say, this is why this happened to me, whether it's a story about the universe or whether it's a story based in theology or something like that. We have some explanation for it. And I think maybe this is part of what makes us so wonderfully human, again, is this capacity for story. I like to think about this, it's not my phrase originally, but stories are sticky. And so we think about even the ability to make memories. Most people, we don't really retain facts all that well until we can attach an emotion to it. And then something becomes much more memorable. We can probably all recall a time in our life when, I don't know, maybe something made us angry and, we kind of snapped, maybe in the grocery store or something like that, something totally benign, but we remember because there's such a strong emotion connected to it, all of a sudden that's much more intently kind of burned into our brain and easier to recall. And so I think part of this storytelling and creating meaning is helping us to retain memories about kind of our lived existence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a couple things that I want people to know about this is, first, is that I like to emphasize that we are all storytellers. Like, one of the reasons why I think that this is important to convey and to really take in is because we are often taught that story is something that's reserved for like the creative types. And I deal a
Right.
lot in writing and helping people write. And people will say, like, I can't write, I'm not good at this. And so they think I'm removed from it. And I mean, absolutely, you might not have maybe some of the same natural gifts like myself. I've always been a writer. That's just been part of who I am. Not everyone's going to have that. Certainly you can develop skills. You can work with someone like me to help you bolster those skills or to support you in the process. But it doesn't mean that you don't have ideas that are worth sharing, a
Hmm.
perspective, point of view, something that is worth getting out of your head. And also that it's not possible. You don't have to live with it just on the inside, unexplored, unexpressed, as though that's reserved for the select few. And the
Hmm.
other thing that I really want people to take in about this, that I was just thinking of while you were speaking, is that as much as I'm saying, yeah, all of this is a story, our brains are gonna, make some type of story out of it. That doesn't mean also that we can't aid the process, like, or
Right.
make it
Right.
better or
Yeah.
kind of, control it in some way. So, like,
Yeah.
again, if you're trying to teach someone something, if you're trying to share knowledge or maybe stuff that you view as more factual or data driven or whatever, that doesn't mean that we can't communicate it in a way that really works for that brain that is just so ready to snap up a story. And again, this is why I really try to help people understand I'm using the word story, but that doesn't mean that it has to be a traditional story or even a personal story. A story is a way, it's like a map, it's like a road map, a way of taking
Right.
people from point A to point B as they learn something new or absorb new information in a new way.
Mm-mm. And I think about as we look back on the various stories of our life, it's a sense, or it gives a sense of why we are maybe the way that we are, because we take an experience we've had and we put a certain interpretation on that, and it helps us to understand how we've become who we've become. And that's why I love this podcast. The tagline is the stories that shape us, and I really like your story as well. I think it's a fascinating one, and one that maybe doesn't get explored as much. I often work with people who have overcome significant adversity, maybe in the face of like a terminal illness or a critical accident or things like that. But in your case, it starts with your heart, and that's actually where the name of your company comes from, storytelling with heart. And so if we could just get a little bit of a background, if I understand, you were born with a heart defect, and I'm now, as a parent of a young child and a child with who has a slight heart condition as well. I'm
Mm.
thinking now from the perspective of a parent, oh, what would it be like to hear? And I kind of know now what it's like to hear that your child has a heart defect.
Mhm. Yeah, and I imagine that it would be quite scary, and I have empathy for my parents and their reaction to it. Yeah, you kind of alluded to this, as you said, we have people on here who have terminal illnesses, and like there was a moment before coming on here where I'm thinking like, my story is not this it's not super dramatic. It's not,
Mhm.
life and death. Well, I mean, although there was certainly risk involved and it felt that way at times. Um, but it's funny because I also will hear that people saying that to me where they're like, "Oh, my story's boring. It doesn't, it's not so dramatic." And I'm like, "Trust me, it actually matters."
It does,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so I was born with something called complete heart block, which sounds scary,
It
like,
does
your
actually.
your heart is blocked, like it's not working, but in actual fact, what that meant in total layperson terms is, and what I understood was that, it just did not beat as regularly as a heart would and should, and on the whole would be slower, so it's gonna be a bit more erratic.
Hmm.
Now, when folks are diagnosed with this, my understanding is usually it can happen when they're very small, like babies, and you might put a pacemaker in at that point. Um, or it can sometimes maybe be something that sort of is seen later on in life. And so I grew up with this knowledge that I was different in some way, that my heart did not work the way that hearts should work.
Mhm.
It was defective in some way, that there was risk around it, that my parents were afraid of it. And at some point, I would have to have a pacemaker, but the doctors wanted to wait and see. They could have just put one in, boop, right from the beginning, but they decided to wait and see, which I'm glad that they did. But it also meant I had this, it became like the big bad in my
Right,
life,
right.
the one day.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, at what age did you, like, become aware? Because this was obviously diagnosed before it could maybe be communicated to you that there's something wrong with your heart. They would have checked you out and maybe found it in, I don't know, your first year of life, for example. But at what age did you become aware that there's something wrong with my heart? And do you recall any feelings that you might have had as a little person about that?
Yeah, I definitely recall the feelings. I mean, I think the diagnosis was maybe when I was around 2. It's hard for me to pinpoint an exact moment, but I do recall absolutely growing up with a lot of fear around it. I had to also have, um every so often, I can't recall now how often it would be, whether it was twice a year or once a year, but I would have, a Holter monitor put on, where they,
Hmm,
like,
hmm.
stick all those wires on you and have, like, a recording device hanging off of you for 24 hours or something like that, and I would have to go into, like, the cardiac unit at the
Yeah,
hospital,
yeah.
every so often for tests, and that stuff felt so, like, so gross to me,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term. I Because what I felt around all of this was like, there's something scary going on. There's something wrong with me. My mom is especially anxious about it, but
Hmm.
I know I'm okay. Like, I feel okay. I was physically, yes, maybe a little different, which kind of came out more later on because I just didn't have maybe quite the same, like, endurance capacities as other kids. But I was a healthy, thriving, active, busy, creative kid. And so, but I felt like this is the thing that, like, people see me, or like
Hmm,
going into
hmm.
the doctors, they're treating me like there's
Right.
something wrong with me, like I'm really
You're the kid
actually
with
ill.
the defective heart. And did it, as a child, did it manifest in any way where there was some sort of restriction or limitation on what you could do?
No. Um, Except for, I mean, I couldn't really keep up so much with the other kids. Like, I remember being in elementary school, and maybe if there were, like, longer distance races or something, but, like, in those younger years, the way that kids run around and
Mhm, mhm.
stuff and play, like, I don't think it really came up there. But I remember, for example, being called out for it. Like, I remember being in gym class and running around same as all the other kids, and my gym teacher, who must have received a note or something about this, was like, "Oh, Camille, you can sit out."
Right,
And being
right.
horrified, like, horrified, and going home and making my mom call them and tell them never to say that. I mean, truthfully, it's not, you don't, like, announce, like, he did do
Mhm.
something wrong, but the level of my, embarrassment and shame. And I do remember, when we were a little bit older, like, them teaching us to take our heart rate after games or running around or something, and I would just, like, lie about mine. And anytime I did fall behind, if I was, on bike riding with my family or something, if I fell behind, I would feel this just, yeah, this real ick, because again,
Mhm.
there was sort of, it's like, am I just slower, or is it because of my heart? And if it's because of my
Yeah, yeah.
heart, then I feel just so bad about that.
What's really interesting, I think about the language that we use, and so you use words like gross and ick, and very often we'll use a word like that when what we're trying to express doesn't really have language around it. And or there's so many different things. It's like I just need one word to try to capture the essence of what I'm feeling. And I feel pardon me, I feel a sense of discomfort on the inside. And there's so much attention at a young age, at an impressionable age, the child being put on me because of my heart that I'm being told routinely is defective and fragile in a sense. I get this impression that you were treated as fragile. Did that lead to, like, how did your friends, or maybe how did your schoolmates and things navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, like, first of all, that notion of fragility, I mean, it to this day, this is stuff I kind of am, like, rubbing up against of, these, like, childhood beliefs that I so did not want to be fragile, and
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
didn't want to be seen as fragile. I wanted to be seen as strong, and a long time ago, I wrote a blog post about this, about as a teenager then going into those doctors, those appointments to have my heart checked or whatever. And I mean, I was already, a punk kid, but wearing like all the armor, like the big combat boots and the leather jacket. And it's like, I was putting on this like demonstration of like, I'm not fragile. I'm strong. I'm resilient. I'm
Hmm.
tough even. Um, and in terms of the other kids and stuff, like, my policy was like, we don't talk about this. This
Right.
is a secret. And that's something we can get into more, but I kept it as much of a closed secret as I possibly could well into adulthood.
Mm. So what's really interesting about this here is, um, one, that you were getting mixed messaging, because you were getting this messaging maybe from in your body saying, yeah, something's not quite right, but it's not the end of the world. It's something I can deal with. But from the outside, from the adult messaging, what you're getting, and as a parent, I understand. Again, when my son was diagnosed with his heart condition, like my heart sinks. And it's funny how we talk about our heart like that. This feeling of like, is he going to be okay? And again, with him, like what it amounts to is it'll show up later in life as his body grows bigger and his heart has to work harder to sort of deliver blood. It won't deliver it in quite the same way. But as a child, he can just rip around like, a kid with no restrictions, which is great. But I know how I felt about it. And so I feel this awareness that I don't ever want to like impose on him it's my love for him and my fear of loss of him or something happening to him, because I love him so much. But I try to be thoughtful of not imposing this on him, so he doesn't have this awareness that, oh, dad thinks I'm fragile. And so actually, I think my response is, we do all kinds of wrestling. He calls it flying when I chuck him onto a stack of pillows or things like that. And he thinks
Yeah.
it's the greatest thing ever. But so I hear your story, and what you did is like you were receiving this sort of messaging that felt mixed for you. And so now there's this stronger response. You're not getting the message, the adults in my life, and in particular, maybe you're not getting the message that I'm not as fragile as you think I am. So now I have to put on this sort of like external show and display. And you mentioned the term punk, and so you sort of found yourself in that genre. When did that start showing up for you?
I mean, first of all, before I answer, what a great like recap. Thank you. And I also, having grown up with this, I really love to try to impart that message if I can to parents, right? Because I get it, that you're gonna have fear, but having this natural trust in your own body, yourself, and your resilience is so important. And I mean, it wasn't just my heart condition. I grew up with anxious parents. My mom suffers from health anxiety and hypochondria as well. And so it was really amplified for her. And she has her own, like physical and health traumas in her background. And so I can, again, have empathy for it. But I also look back and I'm like, you know what? This didn't have to be such a big deal that,
Right.
like, we talk about the stories that we tell around it. And it's like, holy smokes, this story really, really escalated. And I would have loved to have a little more like, "You're okay, you know,
Mm,
you're
mm,
good," in my life. Um, Having said that, your question about, like, you know, getting into punk and things like that, I mean, I was always a little, a little bit rebellious and a little bit, like, just even different in my own personality and self-expression and, like, you know,
mm,
not necessarily doing things the way that the other kids did them, and that kind of entrepreneurial streak was in there also from the beginning. Other kids were maybe doing lemonade stands. My sister and I were doing, like, full-on carnivals with, like, poorly, constructed dunk tank and, you name it. And when I got into high school, so probably around, 14, 15, starting in grade 9, just started getting more into, punk rock and into, ideas of social justice at the time, animal rights activism. So I was very busy in high school. I had an animal rights, um group organization that I started with my sister and that actually wound up spreading a little bit. And we made zines together. I published books of poetry and in journals, and we put on benefit concerts. We were really active in music, and we were always speaking out, particularly around social justice issues. And that kind of informed a huge, a huge chunk of my life. And so, I mean, that was
yeah.
sort of already there, but I think it was also, at times a tool that I could kind of use to feel
Mhm.
like, oh, stronger, tougher, and more kind of capable and in control.
Right, right. Now you said something that I don't wanna just kinda gloss over because this sounds kind of fascinating, but you said you put on carnivals as kids and like poorly constructed dunk tanks. I was like, "Huh, that already sounds
Yeah.
like a good time." What like,
What was it?
what actually would, like, take place here? Because this sounds like actually a really good time.
It was. I mean, so I have a twin sister as well, which
Mhm.
I haven't mentioned before. I have an identical twin. So it was often her and I. And yeah, I mean, the carnival thing is always stands out in my mind because it's just so typically, I'm wanting to like make things bigger and more creative. The dunk tank, well, we there was a neighbor whose granddaughter visited now and we would kind of rope her into this stuff, and we were like, "Let's throw a carnival," and we had all, different games and stuff, and the dunk tank was really, "Give us money and we'll pour a bucket of water on our friend." I don't know
Uh,
how we roped her into that, but what I'd add to that too is, also even as a kid, I was self-publishing books and stories, and
yeah,
my parents gave us a lot of, like, we were never really into organized sports so much, and, again, partly because of my heart, I probably veered away from it a bit, but also it's just we were never the most, physically, like, gifted kids or coordinated or whatever, and nor did we really love to be in, situations where people were just telling us what to do. "Okay, now do this, learn this." We really like to
mm.
pretend and to daydream and to make stuff up, and I'm grateful for that because I think it's also really allowed me to do what I do as a career, which is also, making up a lot of things, inventing my own path, my own
Yeah.
business, and helping other people find creative avenues as well.
So you shared a detail there that somehow I must have missed in any of our previous conversations. This is that you have an identical twin sister. And so why I'm curious about this now is because you have this heart condition. But I gather, did your sister have any condition like this, or was this unique to you?
Yeah, it was unique to me.
Okay. And so did that affect, like, did you observe or were you aware of, like, your parents? Because now I'm thinking my science brain goes in and goes, "Oh, man, we have, like, a scientific study here. This is interesting because you have 2 people that are largely genetically identical except for this one thing here." But did that affect, like, how your parents treated you? Like, did they treat either of you, differently in regards to that?
I think The answer is complicated. I mean, there was stuff that I learned and that I went through and that I dealt with that she didn't, or she had to deal with it on the outside. Like, she maybe didn't have the same messaging that you might be fragile, but she had then the messaging that her sister, who she's so close to, is.
Hmm. So what's fascinating about this is when you have an identical twin who is, um, and I actually want to explore that a little bit more too, because I think this is an interesting dynamic that many people are curious about.
Mm.
Um, but who's receiving the message that this person who's essentially like an extension of myself is someone that I could potentially lose because of this thing here. I suppose the other thing I was curious about was if there would be any kind of maybe like resentment develop as a result of you receiving a different type of like or more special attention because of this, or like how that would show up for her, as though maybe she's getting a little bit less attention because she doesn't have this thing that makes her fragile or needing special care.
I'm not sure. I know we have had conversations in the past, about how she perceived this, how it, maybe affected her. I think more than anything, my guess would be it's like she got absorbed as well into this sort of narrative
Mm,
and secret. So I don't know that there was really resentment there, and I don't know that my parents necessarily like really treated me, much more differently in a particular way or obvious way. It was more of sort of this undercurrent of anxiety and kind of this whole narrative of what this meant, and to
mm,
like that we have to sort of tiptoe around it and that type of thing.
yeah. And so growing up with a twin, I mean, I guess for all of your existence, you've had this other human being kind of beside you, and you have this level of closeness. Do you have the ability to, I guess, almost like communicate? What's the word I'm looking for? You say non-verbally, but essentially understand each other intuitively without necessarily having to use words. Like, what does that bond look like in your case?
I mean, I could talk about this for hours as well because twinship is a complex thing. So we have always been very close. The nonverbal communication, yes, but it depends on the situation. So, for example, if we're sitting around a table together and you say a particular thing, and I know I have a feeling about it. Like maybe I think, "Oh, it's so cute and sweet that John just said that." And I might like if say she's sitting beside me, I could nudge her with my elbow, you wouldn't even notice it, and she would nudge me back and we would both know we're feeling the same thing. That's not going to happen
Right.
with everything. It's not going to happen all the time, but it is going to happen with certain things. I will say we are, like I said, we're very close. We were super close growing up. We are still close today, but we live very different lives. We're very different
Mm,
people. We live in different places, have different occupations, different lifestyles, the whole bit. And as an adult, navigating that can be more challenging because a part of you still always wants this real deep closeness that you had as kids, but at the end of the day, you are also individuals who need to go in their own way, in their own
mhm.
direction, and you need to be able to really respect and have space for the other person's choices and lives, but there's a part of you that's also always going to be like, "But, like, I need you and want you close to me," and so,
Right.
like, it's an interesting kinda dynamic.
And were you a novelty at school, like growing up, being twins?
The kind of worst part I would say about being a twin is that it is hard to, like, you have to fight for your individuality. You have to fight for
Mm,
people to see you as a person. And so that certainly happens that can happen in any context you're in. So it did happen in school. I mean, I got used to turning around to either Megan or Camille, like it was one word. My sister's name is Megan, so it'd be Megan or Camille, or De Putter, my last name,
Mhm.
or worst of all, twin. And so you're like that just kind of exemplifies even having your own name is not it's not really the way people see you necessarily. It's not something you're really even like allowed to kind of have full ownership over. Um
Mm.
and then that can be challenging within a family dynamic as well with, as you go through school, within sort of whatever communities you're in together. And so whenever I see people who have twins, it's like I don't want to overstep, but it's kind of like if anyone's listening who has twins, please know they are 2 whole people on their own. They are 2
Yeah.
whole individual entities, and there might be so many things that are similar about them, including, like, not just how they look, but including their personalities and stuff. But just remember and honor and appreciate that they are 2 separate people, because then finding your own independence and just getting to be your own person and really owning that is then its own journey.
Mm. What is what is the best part about having a twin sister?
That you have a baked in absolute best friend, and especially right when you are young, and, like, we didn't often fit in, and we found our people, our groups of friends as time went on and stuff, but, you know, it I was never it was never I never had to go through life. What you had to go through as a person, one person in the world that you had to navigate
Yeah.
on your own. I never had to do that really. I mean, as an adult, yes, but then I had all of those years of experience behind me. I never, had to just really face life on your own as an independent soul. Like I always had my best friend there.
Mm. I love that term, a baked-in best friend. That's a great way of describing it. Um, and so when did you, I guess, recognize, and I'm wondering if maybe this took place in the teen years, where you start to recognize we want to establish more independence, like, and was this sort of an agreed upon thing between the two of you where you both recognized it mutually, or did one of the kind of recognize it first?
Yeah, I went first and it was not an easy transition in my family. I mean, it's hard sometimes, it's hard to answer this totally honestly without getting fully into the very messy family dynamics, but I grew up in
Fair
kind of
enough.
this codependent kind of home, and things really evolved a lot around um my mother and kind of what she wanted and needed, and her was she was sort of the focus within the family. And it was naturally hard for my sister when I at 15, 16 kind of started kind of going verging off more, and at 16 getting a serious boyfriend as well. And I really wanted that independence. I wanted it sooner than she did. Um and but that's normal. It's a normal part of any kind of, childhood development to try to find more independence and so on. And it's also normal within twin dynamics. But my family wasn't really able to find that or acknowledge that or see that as maybe healthy or normal or beneficial. And they weren't really able to provide support to my sister who's going, oh, what's happening? Like Camille's going in her different directions. She maybe wants to spend time with her boyfriend instead of me, or, and so they
Mm.
weren't really able to support her in that. And instead they came down pretty hard on me and really just wanted me to stay with my sister, stay put, not look for independence or anything like that.
So now I think, like, looking back, was there a point in time where you were able to have that honest conversation? Maybe you both had left home and now you're able to sort of sit down and have this conversation and maybe mend what might have been perceived as a hurt or a slight or anything like that.
Between my sister and I?
Hmm.
I mean, I think we had a conversation just recently actually where we were kind of like, "Hey, let's unpack what happened, hear more, and like I maybe have talked a little bit about what happened to me from my point of view. Um, but she was sharing like what it was like for her to to feel like she was like losing me and feeling kind of vulnerable like that, and just like the way that my mom reacted to it and stuff. So honestly, John, I feel like we've my sister and I, there have been so many things that we maybe talk about and stuff, but you also have such a fundamental bond that
Mhm,
even
mhm.
when difficult things happen, you kind of mend where you can, but there's never any doubt that you're going to keep going. There's never any doubt that you're going to
Right.
be in each other's lives. So I don't know that we have like there's probably more even within the context of us as a whole family of a lot of the stuff that was just never talked about again or necessarily healed or mended, but my sister and I always had a fundamental sense of like belonging to each other in a way.
Mhm,
You're
mhm.
not going to lose the other person. There might be distance, the relationship might change. Um, but you're never going, at least in our case, I can't speak for everyone, of course, and some twins do have really, big breaks. But neither of us have ever felt that that's the risk, if that makes
Mhm,
sense.
mhm. Absolutely. When was the first time that the two of you started living separately and there was some real, like, physical distance between you? I have more questions about that. I'm curious sort of when that started.
When we went to university, so like 19
Mhm, mhm. And you went to, like, separate universities in the same city or even in separate cities as well?
in separate cities. Yeah, we went to different schools in different cities. Um, so I grew up in a, a smaller city called London outside of Toronto, and I went to school here in Toronto. I always wanted to go to the big city, knew that's where I was going. I was so excited to go and kind of, find that independence and sort of sense of freedom and carve things out on my own. My sister went to just a different school in a different city, not all that super far away, but yeah, it was our first time, and we visited each other, and we wrote letters to each other, and um, we had a lot of fun kind of interacting with each other in our new communities and sort of finding ways to do that. And through the years, like she's lived in different countries. She lived in Scotland for 5 years more recently. So we've had different, sort of physical distance at different points, and we've always lived in different cities. We've basically it's been very brief that we've ever lived in the same city as adults.
So I think there's maybe perhaps an element of novelty there that emerges as well. Um, I gather, you maybe grew up pre-internet as children, but maybe the internet was starting to become a thing. I mean, I was engaged in a long distance relationship to my now wife for kind of a couple of years, and I say relationship loosely because even though I knew that she was going to be the person I spent my life with, it wasn't firmly established until we actually arrived in the same city together about 2 years after we'd first met in person. But at some point, I think so. So we spent a lot of time on the phone and a lot of money on phone cards. And I wonder, was this a situation where you talked every day, or maybe it's just a couple times a week? And because what's kind of exciting is there is this element of novelty. We get to explore this relationship in kind of a new dynamic where there's this freedom, but there's this reassurance of ongoing connection.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember how often uh we would talk. I don't think we talked on the phone too much. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we emailed, but I think the novelty, like, and also going back to our sort of our creative time together as kids and as teenagers, we continued that. So, like, I remember we would send each other like parcels of, sort of care packages or letters. Like, we didn't have to write letters. The email did exist.
Yeah.
And, um, but, we would put stickers on them and, like, make them look cute and fun, and then, you're especially, like, that first year when we were both in residence at our respective schools, being
Mm,
able to go to your mailbox and get a package from your sister. So we've always kind of found ways of connecting that way in a way that is fun. And like when she lived abroad, going and getting to visit her there and spend time with her. She lived in Glasgow, and Glasgow became, my home away from home in many ways too, because I would, we have these kind of rituals and places that we would always go and things that we love to do together there.
I like that you said that email did exist, but but what this highlights though is there's also something to like receiving something physical in the mail. And I think now about the psychology, maybe this is why Amazon is such a thing. It's like getting a present every couple of days or something like that for people who shop on Amazon or even other places, right? I order something physical comes in the mail. And I've often, because I had pen pals as a kid, but before email,
Mhm.
if anyone listening can imagine those days, but, but now I imagine like if I was to write a letter to someone and mail it to them without telling them, and it was to show up in like their mailbox, I think there'd be a lot of like excitement and intrigue and curiosity, and it would really provide a lot of delight because now it's kind of a novel experience. This way of communicating in what's seen as
Mhm.
maybe an old fashioned way.
Yeah, I love snail mail, and I think it actually does. It provides many opportunities for creativity. So in my own work, I have, I've written 2 books that I have self-published and that I have, you can order one of them on Amazon, but one of them was expressly through my own website. So, it's sold out now, but at the time I would be, mailing packages, and I made things to go along with it. I made stickers. I've also made, little card decks, with writing prompts or gratitude prompts. And I've done like just lots of, I've done little postcards and stuff that are branded by my business. So things that you can send out in the mail, and sometimes the shipping costs with this stuff makes it difficult. But if you can do it in a way that is inexpensive, like even just mailing someone a thank you card or a postcard. I typically have done Christmas cards or holiday cards. I just think when you send something in the mail. One year I did like a whole package of like like an annual report type thing that I did with, full sort of stories about my clients and things. I think there's an opportunity there to give people something that is tactile, that is a
Mm.
surprise, that feels special. Um, so it's something that I've definitely enjoyed and tried to incorporate into my business and my communications generally.
Yeah, the novelty of receiving like a really nice physical token. I was thinking about for those watching the video, this water bottle I have here, you probably recognize the color and
Oh,
whatnot. For those listening, it's a water bottle from Precision Nutrition. They sent that to me, but for myself and my own business, I would write postcards to clients when they sign up with me, or I continue to write postcards when clients sign up with me. And of course, I don't tell them I'm going to send this, but a lot of my clients have said to me, I took that postcard and I put it on my fridge because
mhm.
what I do is from their intake form, I gather some information about them and their backstory, and I try to write something meaningful that's unique to them, so it's not a generic message. And I write it by hand with my somewhat messy penmanship. That's I could cheat, and my wife has beautiful penmanship, and I could cheat and kind of have her write it. But I think there's something about seeing there's genuine like human effort gone into this above and beyond maybe just sending a meaningful email.
I love that, and your point too that it's, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like people think, "Oh, my penmanship is terrible." Great. It shows that it's yours. It shows that you did it. And I just would really emphasize that as well. Like if you're sending any type of card, a welcome card, a thank you card, a holiday card or whatever, don't just sign it. And I know it's so hard for people. There's a lot of people who freeze up when and I say this because my husband is like that. I know a lot of people who are like that, and it's like I think of it as like birthday card syndrome. He'll be like, but I don't want to. I don't know what to write, and
Right. Yeah.
could say happy birthday, but any kind of attempt to say like, I see you,
Hmm. Hmm.
you individual person, not like that. I'm going to give you more time than just a signature. If you just put a signature on it, it's like, well, you just did this en masse. But if
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
make any kind of just acknowledgement about the person, and by the way too, that's not the place for like if you're sending out, say, a holiday card or something, then This isn't the
Yeah.
place to say, like, "Let's work together," just be like, "You're
That
awesome. I wish you a great year."
a couple times for some special clients that I've worked with for quite some time, I sent them like a custom yoga mat. I knew their favorite animal and their colors and quotes and things like that. So I had custom designed yoga mats sent to them, and one of them is a unicorn actually, and and yeah, I would never think about like putting my logo on there or something because they don't need to see that. They know exactly who it came from when they see this. I know where my unicorn yoga mat that has, my magical place written on there. I know where that came from. And it creates a sense of, because again, I think the work that both of us do is really, it's a deeply personal work. It's not something that's mass produced. It's a very individual, deeply personal work. And to really help people to continue to be successful and grow from working together, these little tokens, or maybe even not so little tokens, really really help to foster that and encourage that.
Yeah. And I would argue that goes for, anyone who is trying to develop a personal brand of some kind as well. Like even if you work within a larger organization, but part of your job is to develop relationships, then, just that act of sending something to someone,
Hmm.
sending a gift or a card or something that shows that you see them and that isn't trying
Hmm.
to persuade them to buy from you or that isn't about you and your brand, guess what? Like you just said, John, that person is going to remember you and your brand and your organization. Like you said, they know who you are, they know where you work. So it doesn't have to be like maybe me, if you
Right, right.
extend this expression and something of yourself and that personal connection, then then you're s- then you're building something there, that you're building something that will last.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love these conversations, and I'm sure this will be one of many that we get to enjoy together. But as we bring this to a close, there's been some unexpected advice that come out of this, and that's part of the reason why I love this. Is it's sort of free flowing, and something comes out of it, and we learn something new. And I go, oh, let's go down this trail here. And I really appreciate just your openness and sharing your lived experience, and it's clear why you're so good at what it is that you do. Someone listening to this conversation, if you would like them to take something away from hearing this conversation today, what would that be?
I guess I would want people to know that that story that you have about yourself and what that means to you does not have to be the end of the story or the final story. I grew up
Mhm.
feeling all the shame about this thing, and I kept it a secret for so many years. Um, but as I learned to share that story and I learned to make it part of my own, kind of personal narrative and who I am and what I stand for, when I started talking about it and sharing it with people, when I got up on stage and turned it into a speech, when I got to the point where I was no longer hiding from it, but actually really wearing it as a badge of honor. I have an anatomical heart tattooed on my back. My business name is Storytelling with Heart. That's deliberate.
Mm.
It's a pun. I was able to reincorporate this story as something that I am proud of, a story that I can use to help others, a story that I can use to, connect with other people also by sharing some of my own vulnerabilities and difficulties in my life. That that is profoundly empowering, and it shifts the nature of that story in the first place. So, stories are kind of an ongoing thing, and we
Mhm.
have an opportunity to rewrite them, to edit them, to look at them again and assign different meaning to them. So whatever, anyone who's listening, whatever your own personal story is, I would encourage you to, interact with that story. Consider, you know, kind of writing it in different ways and maybe expressing it in some different ways and just being open to engaging with it. And it may wind up being one of the most impactful things you can do is to actually share that story.
Mhm, mhm. And I love that. Just this idea that anyone, professional or not, that take ownership of your story. embrace it because it's part of what makes you uniquely you and special in this world. Where's the best place for them to reach you?
My website, which is camilledeputter.com. And I also record or host a podcast called the Storytelling with Heart podcast. So you can also find me on just about any podcast platform, wherever you listen.
Amazing. And you write a fantastic newsletter as well. And so I'd encourage anybody who has a real interest in storytelling. It's well worth reading. So thank you again so much, Camille, for being on the show today. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, John. Thanks for taking me down some different avenues and some different things that I hadn't thought about before. And being in the profession that I am in, my specialty and superpower is helping other people tell their stories and listening to them and pulling their thoughts and ideas and experiences out of them. And so it was very refreshing to just get to dive into my own and tell you all of these, personal details about myself, kind of a novelty for me. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.